markets amidst the COVID shockwaves, brought to you by Generational Capital. On behalf of Generational Capital, I accord a very warm welcome to all of you for sparing your precious time in attending this webinar. We hope all of you are safe at home and practicing all social distancing measures. We're just waiting for Vineet Sukumar to join us, our first analyst. And we already have with us Satvik Jain, who is second analyst, and he's the fund manager at RH Perennial Fund. To introduce Satvik, he's basically a global investor trying to identify major wealth creation trends, monopolistic and fast-growing, capital-efficient companies which have reinvestment ways and that are run by able minority-friendly management. He has previously led the equity asset allocation at one of India's largest multifamily offices and has advised assets of more than USD 3.5 billion. He was also part of a four-member team at Elara India Gateway Fund managing approximately 40 million USD, and he has also worked with Deloitte on deals upwards of USD 10 billion. He has also co-founded the Zomato of the fitness industry called fitnessholic.com, aggregating over 150 fitness centers on his platform and is also a professional golfer on the PGTI. Thank you, Satvik, for joining us today.
Thank you, Vinayak. It is a pleasure interacting with all of you and look forward to the interaction. I think Vineet also has joined.
So, a very good afternoon to you. Hi, Vineet. How are you?
Good. How are you?
So, to introduce to our viewers, Mr. Vineet Kumar is the co-founder of Vivriti Capital and Cred Avenue. They are two leading financial institutions which have completely transformed how financial services are offered to clients in India by combining technology with value addition. Although he needs no introduction, but to this, we need led the capital markets management, finance, and treasury functions at IFMR, which is also now known as Northern Arc. In this role, Vineet had the core strategy business plan for IFMR and also developed strong relations with capital market investors. Vineet was instrumental in Northern Arc raising USD 7.5 billion of debt for its clients, also taking the balance sheet to INR 450 million. Prior to IFMR, he also led key institutional relations at Standard Chartered Bank with exposure deals across M&A, capital markets, and corporate finance. He also worked with Tata Administrative Services, a crack team within Tata Group responsible for targeted strategic initiatives across group companies. Vineet has completed his master's degree in business administration from IIM Bangalore and bachelor's degree in engineering from IIT Kharagpur. On behalf of Generational Capital, I accord a very warm welcome to you, Vineet, and thank you for coming on board and having this discussion with us.
Thank you for having me here.
Okay, to set the ball rolling now, I would like to, my first question would be to Satvik. Satvik, given how the equity markets and how the financial markets have performed in the last 12 to 14 months and how COVID has affected us, do you still believe that the age-old adage that compounding is the eighth wonder of the world, the famous line by Albert Einstein, does it still hold true? Do you feel that in the short term, given how markets have the short term instead of the traditional compounding way of investing?
Right. Thank you so much, Vinayak. So before we delve into compounding, first I would like to give an idea about what I think about investing. So ultimately, investing in any asset class, be it equity, structured debt, FDs, or real estate, it is foregoing consumption today to have the ability to consume more later. So basically, the ultimate aim of any kind of investing is to improve our lifestyle over any given period of time. So essentially, there are three components to it. So to increase the value over time, first, the principal has to be there, which are the various inflows, then the rate of return and the time. So currently what I am experiencing with most of the HNIs and the investors which I am interacting with, they are more focused on the rate of return rather than the time. So this is making them focused on very short-term, gimmicky things like you can say tier 2 cryptocurrencies or small and mid-cap stocks, which are right now rallying due to the emergence of very high global liquidity. So ultimately, we can say compounding is the eighth wonder of the world. So this was the famous line quoted by Albert Einstein. So he who understands it earn it. He who doesn't pays it. Now I would also like to add a line to it, which was quoted to me by one of my very close colleagues, that if compounding is the eighth wonder of the world, patience is the ninth one. So this is just a graph on compounding which we have shown. So basically, kind of companies which we are trying to look at are growing at around 18 to 20, 22%. So over any 10-year period at an 18% compounding, a 1 crore would grow to approximately 5.23 crore. But if we take a 30-year view, that 5.23 would not grow to say 5.23 into 3x, which is your 16 odd crore. It would grow to 143 crore. So this is the power of compounding which we want to harness along the journey through equities or debt or any other asset class. And this is why having a very long-term view into the correct asset class is very, very important. So now coming to what is the biggest enemy of investors. So the biggest enemy is not, the volatility in the financial markets. What I have seen is the biggest enemy of investors, be it young investors or senior ones, is inflation. So if we see, we collected this data from RBI. So from 1960 till date, the average CPI inflation has been approximately 8%. So what we are saying is, if we are sitting on cash, your 1 crore would grow to less than 1 lakh rupees also, if we calculate the actual value of money. So now how have various asset classes performed in comparison to inflation? Because the first priority is to beat inflation and then, take the wealth creation into perspective. So now the general perspective is equities are a very, very risky class, and most of the affluent HNIs and family offices have very low allocation to it. So this we have seen that over any 30-40 year period, just the dumb index has grown around 45x from say early 1990s. If we compare that to gold, so just for your information, Indian households have the largest reserves of gold in the world. So just the gold has given around an 18x, which is approximately 3x less than the Sensex. And if we add dividends also just to the index, so Sensex would have grown around to 70x basically. So this is the kind of compounding we are seeing in equities. And if we see the major turning points of indices also, be it the Harshad Mehta scam, the Asian crisis, or the dot-com bubble, or the recent COVID crisis also. Normally the indices tend to bounce back. The leaders of the indices may change, so the cycles may change, but equities always mirror the nominal GDP plus some percentages over the long term. This has been my experience. Now, what the major issue I have felt with the interactions is basically the asset allocation. So we try to figure out what the average asset allocation across various asset classes is. So we see in most of the developed markets, people are much more into financial assets. Like we can see in UK or USA, people have more than 70% of their net worth into financial assets. But if we see in India, it is only around 20%. That also would be mostly into FDs or insurance. So this takes a large beating into their lifetime wealth multiples over any period of time. Right. Yeah, so this was
speaking
briefly
of asset allocation. So speaking of asset allocation, my next question, Vineet, would be to you. Given how 40% of the global debt is in negative territory, fixed income yields are trending downwards. As an active participant in this space, what would you advise a debt investor to do in such a low yielding environment? And also factoring the liquidity and credit risks that have happened in the wake of the Franklin fiasco, and also how economic activity has been affected by COVID-19. What would your advice be to a current investor in the debt space?
Great questions. And I'll just put up just a couple of slides that will just outline the point that I'm trying to make. and give a sense to the audience in terms of how we are seeing this space develop. Right. So interest rates are definitely at an all-time low, and very clearly this is a market where it is very tough to make return on money on debt and fixed income, right? Given the way, and this happens after every crisis, whether it happens whether subprime or demonetization or post even ILFS or any other situation. Quantitative easing and the ability of central banks to keep rates very low is a given response during these points of time. And in India, especially, where the Reserve Bank plays a dual role of not just being the controller of inflation, but also the merchant banker for the government of India, right? All the more rates remain low, right? Now, how has the market therefore been divided on fixed income specifically? Is that either you have a 25 lakh crore mutual fund fixed income industry, and in 25 lakh crores, I'm including liquid also, right? Which essentially focuses on the highest ratings across, which is AA plus to AAA, and government debt, to provide a return of anywhere between 2% to 6% or 3% to 6% pre-tax, and say 2% to 4%, 4.5% post-tax returns to investors. And if I add FDs to that mix, then that's another 1.5%, 2% post-tax returns, right?
Correct.
And the second category is extremely on the right side, right, where you have high yield funds, you have venture debt funds, and you have a combination of hybrid funds, which are investing in the real estate industry. It is investing in high yielding corporate debt, which is typically financing at the promoter level, etc., and investing into startups which need debt to, I would say, maintain their capital value and form as a bridge between different equity raises, right? These operate in the 16 to 24% range, and if I add distressed debt, then it's a fairly large asset class, but still not exceeding 50-60,000 crores in aggregate. So I have 25 lakh crores on this side in mutual funds. Then if I add fixed deposits, then the number is much larger, right? And then I have maybe not more than 50-60,000 crores on the extreme right, right? Now the issue that we are seeing in the debt markets nowadays is that investors are not seeing the continuum between risk and return, right? And why are they not seeing it? Simply because there are not enough credible managers who are also occupying the continuum, right? As you rightly said, when Templeton collapsed, all mutual funds started cutting down on credit allocation, right? And started moving away from it by focusing more on the liquid strategies, etc. Right? But if you cast a very deep eye into Templeton's portfolio, what went wrong? Right? What went wrong was not about the quality of credit that they held. What went wrong was about holding it in an open-ended fund, right? Where offering on-time, real-time liquidity to clients, right, does not go well with holding a relatively more illiquid portfolio, right? And that's why the entire range of private credit alternatives through alternative investment funds have come in, right? AIFs have become a fairly credible name in the last I would say 8 years or so, 8 to 9 years or so, since 2012, right? And become a credible name. So ignore the Vibriti in this slide, etc. The point is not about the funds we are running, but more to say that the moment you house those kind of credits in a close-ended fund, life changes completely. Now there is a predetermined liquidity to investors. It is not on tap. It is predetermined. You can get it in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, depending on your horizon of investment, right? You can get cash coupons, which allow you to constantly get almost like a dividend yield equivalent from a mutual fund, right? And you can definitely get a range of 250 basis points going up to 600 basis points, or 2.5% to 6% higher post-tax returns than mutual funds, based on range of risk. And you can choose to operate at the lower end, at the middle end, and at the higher end. Now, this is how we are conceiving the development of private credit alternatives using the AIF platform and also potentially using the PMS platforms over time to develop and give a full range to investors and to especially investors with a sizable corpus that they would like to diversify away from real estate and fixed deposits, as Satvik very correctly said, right? Those holdings are very, very high today in India, right? And as you seek to diversify away from them, equity is not the only answer, right? There can also be a fairly reasonable allocation towards a range of fixed income products, provided managers exist along that range, provided they have the ability to understand credit risk, and provided the product also does not build, unnecessary, liquidity, which can give the wrong sense that the underlying investments are liquid. They are not liquid, right? But they can have a fairly stable accrual return over the life of these vehicles, right? So that's kind of how we are looking at this space.
Right. So basically, it has to be a mix of the liquidity profile of the credit risk that is being taken care of, and also the profile of the borrower, or however way the fund is structured. So this depends on basically the fund manager on their entire understanding of the risk space of the client as well as the instrument that they are offering.
Yeah, so we are betting that this so-called gap that lies between mutual funds and many of the high-yielding funds today, that gap will get filled, and we will start seeing, because just to share a data set with you, Satvik shared a very good data set about where India scores versus many of the global majors in terms of allocation to debt itself, right? But within the corporate bond market. In India, the so-called junk market is maybe 10% or 15%. Right? In developed markets, it is 45 to 50%, which means investors have really appreciated the continuum of risk and return, which is not so strong in India.
Right. Thank you, Vineet. Satvik, what would be your views on the same? Would you like to add something for our viewers?
Yeah,
also,
sure.
we are getting in some questions from our viewers. We'll be addressing them at the end of the webinar. Thank you.
So this is a basic slide. I tried to figure out about the liquidity which has been unleashed from the central banks. So I'll like to take the Fed, the US Fed right now. So basically the Fed was launched in 1908, right? So from 1908 to 2008, it printed approximately around $1.8 trillion, right? From that time till the next 10 years, it printed approximately $2.4 trillion. So in total, approximately the printing by the Fed till last year COVID was around, you can say ballpark $3.5 trillion. Now from that time till date, in the past 1.5 years, it has printed more in double digits. So 12-13 trillion dollars it has printed. So you can imagine the excess of liquidity that has come in the financial markets. So now the question is that liquidity has to go somewhere. So approximately 40% of the global debt that is into negative yielding territory, right? So I think more than $120 trillion are into negative yielding territory. So my sense is that liquidity will go into growth assets because liquidity always chases growth. Now the question is whether it would be the US tech stocks which are into a tier growing at 30, 40, 50%, or the emerging markets like India which are growing into double-digit nominal GDP, or structured debt like emerging market structured debt which is giving double-digit returns. That needs to be seen. But it would be a very, very interesting scenario going ahead for the next couple of years, because there will be major trends and major cycles playing out into various sectors and asset classes due to this liquidity. And we are already seeing, signs of that. So like the cryptocurrencies have been rallying very, very high. So like I'm not an expert on them, but I don't understand the fundamentals, but it has to do majorly with the liquidity that has been coming in. So these are very interesting times, what I feel.
So Vineet, your views on the liquidity part. As you've already seen that we've seen a lot of quantitative easing by the central banks, and announced in April 2021, just targeting purchases of almost 1 lakh crore of government securities in the first quarter itself. So how do you feel that the situation is? Is it precariously poised in case we are unable to, in case we are unable to face a third, if we face a third wave, or if there is something that the inflation is, it gives to inflation, or how would you see? Would this result in a ballooning federal deficit, a widespread debt default, or something like that in case we are not able to keep the yields in check?
Yeah, I think all good questions. To our mind, at least, given how we are seeing the second wave develop, now the second wave has developed in a fairly different way from the first wave, right? Now, when the last round of lockdowns happened back in back around a year back, right? The concerns were much less about health. The concerns were much more about livelihood, about movement of goods, about factory shutdowns, about significantly about job losses, right? Uh, but at the end of the day, what we saw starting from June last year was that actually consumption began shooting up, right? To demand for housing, demand for consumables, right? Sales on e-commerce platforms, all of these started shooting up last year, right? This is between June to October, and then once people started getting a sense that recovery was on the cards, then the market started significantly improving across both debt and equity markets towards the latter half of the year, right? This time, however, the situation is very different, right? There is a much higher concern around health and safety, right? And therefore, although data might not be reflecting in RBI data, etc., the governor did come out and say that consumption hasn't really slowed down much. But to our mind, I think we'll see a sharp fall in May, and depending on how the situation remains by the end of May, that might continue to June as well. Basis how the daily numbers look like on COVID, right? So certainly the situation is much worse than last time from a health perspective, from a earning perspective, and therefore the feedback we're getting from SMEs on the ground, as well as in terms of in terms of the sentiment is far worse. Having said that, there are some points to note. One, we don't have national lockdown, and therefore, at least not as yet so far. And given the more localized lockdowns, we are seeing better outputs coming out of factories, right? We are seeing, at least compared to the same time last year, we are still seeing some factories closing down. We are still seeing that, for example, right now, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Orissa, and many other states all have synchronized their lockdowns from 10th to 24th, right? So there is definitely an impact, but the impact is lesser than last time in terms of factory output, in terms of job losses, in terms of migration as well. So while consumption may be lower because there are genuine concerns on health and consumption is not on people's mind, housing sales will fall, for example, right? And a lot of other discretionary consumption may not really happen the way it happened last time from June, right? But the industrial output and movement of goods, etc., is far better as compared to last time, right? So the effects are different. The effect of very high liquidity, at least while in the equity markets, it has pushed the market to an all-time high, and there's a lot of concern in terms of is there a significant disconnect, right? In the debt market, the effect has been different, and you must have seen about the news items about FPIs pulling out a lot of money from debt in India, right? So in debt, the effect has been opposite to equity, which means prices are coming down, yields are going higher. And if you ask me, I think we had gone through we've gone through a phase where yields were, I would say, way too low, unacceptably low. There was a disconnect in terms of what the yields were for AAAs and AA rated credit versus international markets. To give a very simple example to you, if a corporate is borrowing in AAA corporate is borrowing at 5.5% in the Indian market, if you take away the cost of a dollar hedge, it means that they're borrowing at zero in dollar, right? It does not make any sense, and that's why there was a big disconnect. Whereas assets that are there at a slightly relatively lower rating are far better priced, right? Relative to the kind of risk that that investors are taking. So what we will see over the next few months is that, I think the liquidity flow will continue. RBI will also release a lot of benefits for small and medium enterprises and small borrowers in terms of restructuring, as well as liquidity lines. Now, by the way, last time the liquidity lines that came out for small enterprises actually worked very well, and the credit outcomes by the end of the year has a big shout out to the Reserve Bank and the government for managing this well during the course of last year. We think that can continue this year, right? So if you ask me, if given the liquidity available for in the hands of many investors, you can actually make calibrated calls, right? Because again, I'm not an expert in equity markets, but on debt, I can certainly say that you can take calibrated calls as an investor and deploy and get the right returns for the risk that is there today, as we said, across the continuum of risk and rating.
Ops team, can you check? All of us went on mute.
Yeah, Vinayak, you can carry on.
Right. So thank you so much for your views, Vineet. We hope as things move on and the lockdowns are lifted and eventually the cases come down, things get better. Moving on, Satvik, coming to your experience of investing globally, how do you correlate global investing to investing in India? Also, ignoring the minor corrections that have happened in the equity markets in the last few weeks, do you still feel that there is value in this market? What advice do you offer to equity investors to navigate in the next few months?
Sure. So I think first I will tell probably about my experience of investing globally and how I am taking those concepts here to India, and then as to why this is about India and the right time to invest. So we see over the past 30, 40, 50 years of our study of equity markets, that trends are global. And we can directly correlate the US, European, Indian markets, right? So if we see the early 90s, when the Harshad Mehta boom was there was a big infra boom across India in which ACC, Ambuja kind of stocks went up 1000x. Similarly, the similar stocks, the cement and the cyclical commodity stocks went up the same way. Post that, and after a huge crash had happened, then the mother of all bull markets started, which was the Y2K or the tech boom, in which companies like Infosys and Wipro in India, they gave huge returns. In fact, I think Infosys IPO was undersubscribed. It totally came at around 80 crore. And right now it's at a 250,000 plus crore company with 25,000 crore of dividend. In those 5-6 years, it had multiplied many fold. Post that, we had a commodity and housing boom, in which companies like Jaiprakash Associates and Unitech, they went up many multiple times. I think JP Associates went up 800x in those 4 years. And after that, it became bankrupt. That's a different story. Similar was the case in the housing market in the states also. So you could see Freddie Mae and Fannie Mae, which are the listed housing plays in USA. They also went up that many times. So the whole point of this study was that trends are global, and we can see those kind of trends repeating across cycles. So if we see currently also, right now, there is a huge trend across the technology and the platform plays across the United States as well as India. So we can see the big tech companies, mostly called the FANG, the Facebook, Apple, Amazon, showing accelerated growth of above 40-50%. And the smaller ones like Shopify and Roku, which are into digital advertising and digital streaming, showing hyper scaling and hyper growth. The same kind of trends are being repeated here in India. So whichever technology or platform company is showing hyper growth, ability to scale up and market leadership, the markets are not giving you time. They are being the prices are being bid up. So just to give an example, in India Mart IPO came at I think around 1,000 1,500. It went to 8,000 in no time. Info Edge has been, which is the parent company of Naukri.com, it has been up 5-6x over the past 3 years. So this is broadly the kind of trends I see globally. And apart from this, there are also what I try to do is identification of patterns globally. So whatever has been done globally gets repeated in India. This has been the pattern over the past 50 years. Just to give you an example, a very interesting company came to my table by the name 51 Jobs in China. So it has been showing the same things as to what Naukri.com is showing in India. It was approximately 40-50% of the Chinese job market, and it was growing at probably 20% plus. And China was at the same place where, say, and India is now. Now we could see similar patterns repeating in Naukri.com. So, say 6-7 years back, Naukri was 50% of the job market. Then it did its advertising campaigns and became a monopoly in its sector. These are the kind of trends I try to figure out. Then the same was the case in a commoditized market, like say grocery retail. So we famously know the examples of Walmart and Costco, right? In USA, they have been the low-cost producers in grocery retail. What that essentially means is they work on a hub and spoke model from the 1970s and 1980s. They will set up a large store outside the main city and set up a circle of stores around it. We were trying to find out similar patterns in India, but unfortunately, before DMart came, there was no such company because most of the other retailers were doing very haphazard scaling. So that helped us identify companies like this. Then, if a company is having a competitive advantage of, say, a switching cost, so there is a global pharma player by the name Lonza. So it is into contract research and manufacturing for innovators and MNC companies like Abbott and Novartis. So studying this company, we had found out that if any innovator sticks with you for any 2-3 year period, and if you are protecting their intellectual property and doing the manufacturing in reasonable time, the innovator doesn't see any motive to switch from you. Then, seeing the similar pattern repeat across India, we came across a company called Syngene, which is a leader in the contract research and manufacturing space. And finally, when we are looking out for brands and the intangible assets of brands. So just to give you an example, there is a global company by the name Tiffany's, which is into premium jewelry retailing. So if you go to a normal goldsmith in USA and you go to Tiffany, there would be at least a 30% to 40% premium what Tiffany is charging. But still that aspirational value is there. So we were trying to figure out similar patterns into India out of the 5-6 jewelry retailers which are there. And what we found out was Tanishq, which is a brand of Titan, that was doing a very similar thing. So normally a goldsmith in India would take a 5 to 10% making charge. But Tanishq, it is taking a 30% making charge. But still customers prefer Tanishq jewelry because of the trust of the Tata Group. So this is briefly how I try to identify patterns, taking my global investing experience and putting them to India. And just as a disclosure, you can safely assume I am having positions in my fund into all the stocks which we have been mentioned. So. Yeah, Vinayak, you can carry on.
Yeah, thank you, Satvik. So we are getting queries from our viewers as well. My first question, this comes in the debt space. So Rishabh is asking, this would be to you, Vineet. If Fed keeps on punching money into the system, there would be imbalances over the world, periodic fluctuations into various products, like as Satvik mentioned, cryptos or maybe the oil markets. And in future, it might also be the real estate. This widens the gap across markets for people at large. What is the possible solution to this?
Yes, frankly, it's not just Fed. I think we're going to see that happening from the European Central Bank. We're going to see that happening from Japan as well. In addition to the Fed, of course, the Fed's intervention is much larger than possibly the other two combined, right? We will continue to see asset imbalances. We will continue to see some parts of the market really overheating. For example, a crazy example is when Hertz filed for bankruptcy and the share zoomed. Right. So these are all situations that are brought about by the nature of liquidity that is being seen in the market. And you're right that some of this is also moving to the real sectors as well, going beyond just the financial sectors, commodities, and so on, and inflating a lot of prices. Right. So essentially, I think this is a period where we all have to exercise caution, right? And I have only one mantra for this time, which is about diversification. Right? There should be a very, very healthy balance held between different pools of capital. We should definitely not miss the opportunity. The opportunity is quite significant, but the aim should be to diversify out of any single asset class that can see adverse outcomes and swings over the next few months and quarters. Having said that, at least while the Fed has given a sense that they will not be allowing interest rates to increase anytime soon, right? Other central banks had in some cases, including India, started slightly tightening the belt again. India specifically definitely was looking to take back some of the easing measures that had gone in last year. This process got halted by the current wave of COVID, and therefore this is going to be significantly postponed for some time. So to our mind, I think this year we're going to continue to see liquidity. The U.S. government's plan for growing the economy is massive, and that will result in an inflation of asset prices across the world. There's no solution per se really, unless, and today the issue the Fed is grappling with is how to even signal to the market that quantitative easing will be pulled back. It's a huge question, because the moment that signal is given, we've seen things like the taper tantrum happening, right? And therefore the challenge before the Fed is very, very significant, even if they look to take some of this back over the next few quarters, right? So to our mind, I think as far as small savers, HNIs, family offices are concerned, continue to diversify, right? And so that you don't miss the bus, but you don't end up getting caught in any one asset class that tightens very, very quickly.
Right. I hope that answers your question, Rishabh. Also, Vineet, has your approach to identify risky assets in the debt space changed in the last year, given how things have performed?
Yes, that's a great question. In our case, again, going by experience of how companies have performed last year, I think not just last year. I think we've gone through right from the 2010 crisis to 2013, 14, 15 to demonetization to IL&FS to DHFL to Yes Bank to COVID-1 and COVID-2. Right now, few points I think that are important to note from the Indian economy perspective. One, the biggest risk that was and continues to be there is governance, right? Because when money is available easily, right, many issues get swept under the carpet. And when money is available only from discerning financial investors to the right borrowers, right, then a lot of issues that were swept under the carpet start becoming very glaringly obvious. right?
Right.
And that's what, and we've seen this pattern repeat again and again and again and again, right? So while we might be rock stars in terms of looking at financial statement analysis and other forms of data, right? But for us, the real measurement of governance risk has taken top priority over the last 3 years, right? So governance risk by way of the founder's commitment to the business, the founder's ability to build a strong management team and incentivize them, the founder's ability to run very good accounting systems and transparent accounting and reporting, the founder's ability to invest into the growth of the company, and the founder's unwillingness to encourage any related party transaction, right? These are critical parts to our evaluation of a company, because to our mind, fundamentally, given the growth story in the country, India has been a relatively more insulated economy from a fixed income perspective compared to many other countries, simply because the internal consumption demand is extremely high, right? And therefore, many industries can simply run on the domestic consumption given the sheer population size, right? Versus in any other economy which are much more export driven or international economy driven or very globally linked, right? So as a result, we've been able to run fairly robust credit strategies across different ranges of risk and return, ranging from 7% to 10% to 13% to 16%, for example, right? And seen a very low incidence of default. For example, Vinayak mentioned that we run a technology debt platform called Credit Avenue. We have done 60,000 crores of business with a 0.17% credit loss, right? And this is ranging right from 4.5% interest rate going up to 18% interest rate, right? So therefore, it is very possible to run a robust portfolio where there are different levels of risk and return, but the return has typically, in our experience, outweighed the risk if you control for governance risk. If you don't control for governance risk, then you'll end up losing money.
Right. So, Satvik, we have some questions in the equity space as well. So Anmol asked if we invest in equities currently in Infosys, should we exit our position and invest in other options, or should we, considering the influence of the inflation that is rising, or ultimately you're losing money, or do you completely wait until the investment yields decent return?
Right. I think if an 100 has become, so first of all, regarding asset allocation, I think that consultation should be done with an advisor, right, rather than me suggesting him something. But after an asset allocation to, say, equities has done, suppose he has 50% asset allocation to equities. Now within equities, if he's incurring some losses, right, so first he needs to evaluate the quality of the funds and the stocks which have been there, whether they are sector leaders, they are gathering market share, or are dominant franchises who would benefit from the consolidation happening across India as well as globally. And if he's convinced about that, then he should more or less stick with it. And regarding fund also, so my experience have been, if the fund manager is sticking to his strategy, and even if he's underperforming for some time, but he's sticking to his strategy and not wavering from it, I think it should be doing decent over any period of time.
Right. And how do you feel that, given that markets are trading close to their all-time highs, do you think it is a good time to enter it given the next 3, 4, 5 years, with a horizon of, let's say, 4 to 5 years?
Right. So contrary to all the pessimism which is there among the especially the equity investors in India, I feel we are in a roaring global economic recovery due to the money printing that has been there. Just to give you an example, where I have seen, when do commodities make all-time highs? So if we see right now also, say coffee is making all-time highs, or steel is making all-time highs, or economy facing commodities are making all-time highs across the London Stock Exchange also, and the global stock exchanges also. So this only happens when there is a strong economic recovery which is gathering pace. This couple of months of lockdown would get over, but that strong economic recovery, I think it is very much underway, and that can be seen in the numbers also across India as well as globally. Having said that, what I feel would do to this, the equity stocks, especially the couple of months of lockdown and what has been happening over the past 3-4 years, is dominant franchising in sectors which have inherent good economics, like, for example, platform businesses, paint companies, top tier lending institutions. They would keep on gathering market share, and the weaker ones would get out of the league. That is what my belief has been.
Right. So we're continuing to get questions, but I think we are running short of time now. So it was a pleasure interacting with you, Vineet and Satvik. Thank you for taking out time and coming here, sharing your thoughts and enlightening us. So hopefully all of us stay safe, and we would like to conclude our webinar here. Thank you to all our viewers for joining in. We look forward to having you again for future discussions. Take care and stay safe, everyone.
Thanks, Vinayak and team. Stay safe. Satvik, pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.